Hello and welcome to Outdoorsy. I am your host, Madeline. Now, today I do not have a guest for you, but I'm going to be talking about Leave No Trace, why it's important, what it means, kind of some of the historical background of it, some of the nuances of it. And yeah, I think it's going to be a really useful and topical episode today. But I'm even now struggling to kind of get out this intro because before I dive into the topic of today's episode, I do want to talk about what has happened in the last week. So if you'd like to jump ahead to get to the main focus of this episode, which is Leave No Trace, you are welcome to do so. However, I encourage you to stick around for a second because I just want to talk about the election a tiny, tiny bit. Um, as you all know, if you're tuning into this podcast, the purpose of this podcast is to reclaim this term that has traditionally been rooted in colonialism and the patriarchy, the term outdoorsy, and make it something that's accessible for everyone, make everybody feel like they can lay claim to that title and like they belong in the outdoors. Obviously, that in and of itself is political. So I think it's important for me to just talk about a couple things really fast. I'm not going to preach at you. I'm not going to be doom and gloom, but I want to make sure that everybody who is listening to this knows where I stand. So, this space, this podcast, my platform, my social media pages, the Discord server that I have, it always has been and always will be a safe haven for anybody who has ever felt excluded or marginalized in the outdoors or anywhere else. But I want to be very clear, while I do say that this is a safe space for everybody, I do want to make sure you know that this is actually not a safe space for a very specific group of people. If you hold racist, homophobic, sexist, Islamophobic, ableist, or just bigoted views in general, this is not the place for you. I don't want you to feel empowered here. I don't want you to feel like you can speak your mind here because this is not a place for hateful rhetoric. This is only a place for people who have been historically marginalized or just not felt like they fit in anywhere to feel safe. So, in order for those people to feel safe, people who have bigoted views need to be excluded. You are not welcome here. So, I want to talk to everybody, all of my listeners who right now are grieving, are heartbroken, are scared in the wake of this election. I want you to know that you're not alone. I am so sorry. I'm so sorry that this has happened. I encourage everybody to please reach out to your communities, reach out to people who are similar to you in terms of identity to figure out tools for coping mechanisms and things like that. Go to therapy if you can. If you need extra support, I've linked a bunch of resources in the show notes as well. But I hope you know that you're not alone. I'm holding you in my heart. I love you. We're in this together. And I know that safety feels really precarious and out of reach right now. And I recognize that. As a white middle class woman, I hold more privilege than the majority of people. There are parts of my identity that do place me in marginalized groups. I am a woman, I am queer, I am disabled. However, I still hold a tremendous amount of privilege just by the fact that I have a college education. I have a roof over my head. I'm unemployed right now, but I'm not stressed about putting food on the dinner table tonight. I hold a tremendous amount of privilege. And that is why I think it's so important that I show up for you right now, because I think a lot of people are not feeling safe. I feel safer than most simply because of what I look like. And so I want to continue to show up boldly for us in the outdoors. So if you are not feeling safe, like you are not feeling like you can be out there, just know that I am going to continue to show up for you. And I'm going to continue to use my privilege and my platform to uplift the voices of people who are historically marginalized. That is the number one goal of this podcast, of my platform, of what I want to do here, the mark I want to make on this world is to continue to use my privilege for good. And I don't want this to come off as like preachy or overly optimistic or anything like that, because I need everybody to know that I acknowledge how fucking terrifying this is. I mean, it is horrible. But nobody benefits from white woman tears. So I don't want to center myself and like start crying here. I don't want that to be the focus. And any like advice or encouragement that I give you here today, feel free to just tell me like, Madeline, I'm not ready for that yet. Like I am still in this scared grieving phase. Like that is okay. But if you are ready for this, um, just remember that there is strength in softness, right? Like joy can be its own form of resistance. Like your happiness, our happiness as a collective, is an act of rebellion in the face of so much hatred, in the face of so much bigotry. I encourage you to try not to let them take that from you. And I know that's easy again for me to say, as someone who holds a lot of privilege, but if you can try to remember that, try to hold on to that. Please do. Um, and I'm going to continue to show up for us. So, kind of looking ahead, I'm going to start filming and recording season 2 of this podcast starting in January and February. So if you know anybody who exists in the marginalized body and is making waves in the outdoorsy world, I really want to hear who those people are. I posted on Threads asking for people to come forward and if they wanted to be on the pod to raise their hand. But also, if you guys know anybody, please send them my way, because the more diverse voices we can hear from, the better. Specifically, I would really like to connect with more Black women, more Indigenous people, trans people, and disabled people. So if you fall into any one of those categories or some intersection of them, please reach out. I'd love to use my platform to let you tell your story of how you're showing up boldly in the outdoors. My email is going to be in the show notes, so please reach out there. You can also just like shoot me a DM on whatever social media channel you follow me on. Now, I've talked to everybody so far in this intro of like who is in my community, everybody who did not vote for Trump. Now, I just really quickly want to address anybody who might still be listening through this and maybe has voted for Trump. I don't think many people listening right now did, because I think that if you follow me, if you're listening to this podcast, you probably have similar values to me. So if you are listening to this and you cast a vote for him, knowing that he is a convicted felon, you're aware of the harm that he has caused to marginalized people, the rhetoric that he has empowered, the bigots he has made feel safe and comfortable, knowing his stance on women's reproductive rights, knowing how he wants to get rid of the Department of Education. If you voted for him still knowing all of these things, I am both confused and deeply saddened by you. It is beyond me why these things were not deal breakers for you. I know that some people might not believe these things. Perhaps they're not even aware of them. Honestly, I have had some conversations over the last couple of days where I have heard from some people that they just literally do not know these things. There is such an epidemic of lack of education in this country. There are people who do not know he's a convicted felon, or they are in an echo chamber where they are only hearing people say that that is not true, that is fake news. And so if you are someone who genuinely did not know or did not believe these things, and you haven't seen the hate, you haven't heard of the people that have lost their lives as a direct result of his rhetoric and his policies, if you genuinely voted for him thinking that this was going to improve the lives of not just you, but other people, I want you to stick around. Maybe this is controversial because I know a lot of people are just saying that, if you voted for Trump, just block me, unfollow me. I don't want my content to even be in the hands of anybody who voted for him. But like, if you are listening to this podcast, that to me tells me that you have some desire to learn. You maybe are at a point where you are able to reflect and grow and take in new information. So if you are here especially if you are a white woman, please stick around. My door is open. I think that change happens when we open ourselves up to different perspectives. So if I were to shut my door entirely to literally every single person that voted for Trump, I would not be doing what I need to do as a white woman with tremendous privilege in this moment in time. So I do want to make sure that if you are not incredibly bigoted and yet still voted for Trump, keep listening to this content, keep consuming this content, because you're going to be exposed to more diverse people and hopefully expand your understanding and your empathy, so that when we get to the midterm elections and we're voting on things like who's going to be in Congress, and when we get to the next major general election, we're voting on our next president and vice president and a bunch of different policies, you can have a bit more perspective and more knowledge. And if I can do that, if I can make that difference within my own community, white women, then I'm doing what I can there. So thank you for being here. If you fall into that category, I hope you feel like you are welcome. You might feel uncomfortable at times, but I think that's when we grow, is when we feel uncomfortable. So that's what I have to say right now to everybody about this election. I am sure a day from now, a week from now, a month from now, I'm going to have a lot more thoughts and a lot more things to say. But if you didn't skip through this part, please just know that I love you. And I'm so sorry that this is happening. I can't believe it. But as someone with tremendous privilege, I'm going to be trying to do the work and trying to figure out what is going on and making a change where I can. Before we get into the main content of today's episode, let me just say a thank you to sponsors. Just kidding, I have zero sponsors. I make no money on this podcast. I literally make $0. But if you would like to support the production of this podcast, I would appreciate that so much, especially since I am unemployed and I spend a lot of time making this content for you all. The best way you can support me is by becoming a Patreon at patreon.com/outdoorsy. You can also buy my photography prints. So I have a link to my gallery in the show notes, and you can buy a print. You can buy just a digital download if you want like a phone wallpaper of one of the cute little mushroom pictures I've taken recently or something like that. That's another great way to support me. So appreciate it. Thank you so much. And, if you're interested in sponsoring this podcast, let me know. Let me know. I'd love to be able to actually make some income from this. So anyways, back to the content. Enough election talk, because I know we are all so burnt out from this. But let's just jump in to the main topic here. So leave no trace. So if you are unaware, Leave No Trace is basically a set of principles that was developed to help us minimize the impacts that we're making on our environment, ensuring that the beautiful places that we're enjoying in the outdoors stay healthy, stay accessible for not just us, but for generations to come, right? I want to dive into why Leave No Trace matters right now, why we're having this conversation right now, and why I felt compelled to make this an episode right in this moment. I'll go over what the 7 principles are of Leave No Trace, including some of the nuances. I also asked my Discord community, what are some questions that you guys have about Leave No Trace and the details there, and I'm going to try to answer some of those here. But if you have any other questions, please reach out. This is something that I feel like is always kind of changing as new technology happens, the rise of social media, that kind of thing. There's always nuance to this to be discussed, and there's always unique specific scenarios that need to be investigated further. But yeah, let's just dive in, I guess. One thing I do want to say is that it's really important. I was reading this blog post on Melanin Basecamp about how Leave No Trace, and specifically the policing and the enforcing of Leave No Trace, disproportionately impacts Black, Indigenous, and people of color in the outdoors. So I think that it's important for us to recognize that as well, right? We might be well-intentioned with these rules. We might be well-intentioned with our policing of these rules and our enforcement of these rules. But historically, Black, brown, indigenous, people of color, biracial people are oftentimes very disproportionately impacted by this, where they might get quote unquote in trouble for playing music, right, at a campsite, whereas a group of white people playing music at a campsite, nobody would think twice about it. So it's important to think through these like nuances in this context as well. Um, and I'll get into a little bit more of that later in a second, but I wanted to start with that. So why does this matter right now? Why does Leave No Trace matter more right now than it ever has before? Many of you might have heard, since October, the US Forest Service is facing extreme budget cuts. The future of their employees, of their resources are significantly being reduced for next year. This is going to impact their ability to maintain trails, pick up trash, manage waste, protect wildlife, do repairs, basically preserve, maintain, and take care of all these outdoor spaces that we get to recreate on. And this is going to be really significantly felt over the next year and beyond. So while the US Forest Service historically have been responsible for these things, they're not going to be able to impact as much in this next year as they historically have. So it's on us, truly, to help ensure that the public lands remain accessible, clean, and safe. And Leave No Trace is a critical piece of that. It's just the tip of the iceberg, but it is an important piece. So I'm gonna like share some additional things outside of just practicing Leave No Trace that you can do to help reduce the strain on the Forest Service in the next year. But it's a good first place for us to start is just talking about Leave No Trace because it does make a really big impact. Okay, so let me just tell you a real quick history of Leave No Trace. Leave No Trace was created in the 60s and the 70s by the US Forest Service. So they created the set of 7 principles in response to the environmental impact of increased outdoor recreation. So more and more people were going outside and they were like, oh my gosh, how do we mitigate and manage this? How do we make sure that we are encouraging people and educating people on how to recreate ethically outside? So in the 90s, the Leave No Trace Center for Outdoor Ethics was founded. So this is a nonprofit organization that's like further helping spread education and awareness around these principles. Basically, Leave No Trace is a set of 7 principles that's a framework to guide how you interact with the outdoors. So when you are out exploring, hiking, camping, enjoying the great outdoors, how you can minimize your environmental impact and make sure that we are taking care of our outdoor spaces from backcountry trails to urban parks. It's definitely more than just like a checklist. It's honestly more of a mindset. Uh, and it approaches taking care of nature as something that is done with respect, responsibility, and care. I do want to point out again, it's important to recognize that Leave No Trace principles are mainly very white, Eurocentric, developed in the United States, and not really thinking about anybody outside of like just the typical average everyday outdoor enthusiast. So this is not a framework or a list of rules for our Indigenous communities. While the Leave No Trace principles align with a lot of Indigenous teachings about stewardship, it's really important to remember that Indigenous communities have their own ways of interacting with, respecting, and caring for the land that go beyond these guidelines, that maybe go against these guidelines. So Leave No Trace is a helpful framework for everybody else, but definitely need to remember that it's not a hard and fast rule for literally every single person, every single space. There's nuance to everything, right? Okay, so let's break down the 7 principles of Leave No Trace. I want to talk about why this principle exists and also how to practice it. So, first one is plan ahead and prepare. So, this is all about making sure you do all of your research and planning ahead of time to make sure that you don't need any additional help or resource when you are out. you are able to be fully self-sufficient. You are doing all the research to make sure you have the correct permits, you're checking the weather, you have all the proper gear, you understand the rules and regulations of the area that you're going to. Um, those are the types of things that I'm talking about here. So making sure that you are reducing any potential accidental damage, making sure that you're safe. All of these things honestly help you have a much more enjoyable outdoor experience when you are planning ahead. So I think it's a good thing to do regardless of if you care about like the environmental impact of it. But basically how to practice this particular step, research the area you're planning on visiting, understand the rules, check out the seasonal conditions, make sure you're packing the 10 essentials and any additional gear that you need for that area. Make sure you have the training that you need. So if you are going through an area that does have avalanche risk, you need to be avalanche trained. Like a really good example is the hike Snow Lakes in Washington. I see so many people doing that hike in the winter, and like there are multiple avalanche chutes that go through that trail. It is wild to me that anybody who is not extremely trained in avalanche rescue, safety, identification is ever hiking that. Like I would never hike that, and I've taken avalanche training. Definitely make sure that you are ready to go, prepared for anything. You have the right training. Make sure you know what to do in terms of like packing out waste and that kind of thing. Um, and yeah, that's kind of like the main rule of this. It's also like planning, right? Like make sure that if you don't have cell service, you have a way of connecting to satellite to communicate with search and rescue if you need help. If you are going out by yourself, make sure somebody knows where you are and when you're supposed to come back. Those are the things that we're talking about here in this first principle. The second principle is travel and camp on durable surfaces. So why does this one exist? Traveling and camping on durable surfaces means like walking on established trails or setting up your campsite, your tent on a rocky gravel patch rather than fragile meadows. This helps prevent erosion. It protects fragile ecosystems and it keeps you safe, right? Because if you go off trail, if you're camping in sensitive areas, um, not only is it damaging the wildlife and causing issues there, but it could put you at danger because you're going off trail and you're kind of going off the beaten path. So stick to established trails and campsites. If you are like in the backcountry or if you're dispersed camping or whatever it might be, try to only camp and walk on like durable surfaces, if that makes sense. Um, Try not to create unofficial trails. Never create a new fire ring at a campsite that you've developed yourself. Like the best campsites are found, not created. Right. The other piece here is making sure that you are also camping far enough away from sources of water. So one of the rules is that you must set up camp at least 200 feet from water sources. That's lakes, streams, creeks. If there's no other option, if the only safe spot for you to set up your tent is like right next to a stream, then that's a different conversation, obviously, but you want to make sure that you are trying to be at least 200 feet away from water sources if you can. The third principle we're talking about is disposing of waste properly. So this is when we talk about waste in the outdoors, we're talking about trash, we're talking about food scraps, we're talking about gray water, we're talking about poop and pee. So if you are not disposing of your waste properly, it can cause some serious problems, right? Like the obvious is pollution causes environmental damage. It can cause water contamination, it can create health hazards, that kind of thing. But also, it can attract wildlife. And one of the bad things about attracting wildlife to areas that humans are recreating is it obviously like food, like human food is obviously not great for animals, wild animals, right? But if we're talking about like, oh, I dropped my apple core on the ground, Madeline, why is that not okay? The problem is that when you attract wildlife to areas that are populated by humans, that wildlife kind of learns that humans are not necessarily a threat to them, but actually a provider of food and resources. And it creates environments where wildlife are more bold and less afraid of humans and start coming up to them more frequently. I was just up at a lake up near Snoqualmie Pass, and there were these birds. I don't know what type of bird they were, but they were ferocious and they were not afraid of me at all. They were dive bombing me, trying to eat my sandwich. And the reason why that is the case is because that's learned behavior. Because I have seen on social media people holding out their hands with a piece of food, having pictures taken of birds stopping on their hand or flying right up to their hand and taking that food away. Makes for a cool picture, sure, but at what cost? Because now you have these birds that are trained to think that humans are a source of food, and they don't know how to protect themselves from people who are wanting to cause them harm. The same goes for bears. Like, there have been a ton of bears that have to have been euthanized because they have come into campgrounds, they've hurt people because people have not been disposing of their food or storing their food properly. And then they learn that they can come into these areas and get food, and then they end up harming people. And it's just like, oh man, even if you don't care about the environment, like, I would hope that you would care about the wildlife because it has serious impacts. So think about that. Food scraps are trash. Please pack out anything you brought with you, literally anything. Um, Seriously, this includes biodegradable items. It includes apple cores. It includes banana peels. It includes nut shells. Just pack it out. It's really, really easy. Honestly, just bring a trash bag, throw everything in it. It's not a big deal. Hey, so if we want to talk about everybody's favorite topic, which is dropping deuces in the outdoors. No, seriously, peeing and pooping outside is a serious thing that we need to talk about because when there's no bathroom facilities available, it's important to handle human waste responsibly. So if you have to pee 200 feet away from water sources. Otherwise, you risk contaminating the water. Yeah, this is a super important one. Think about your friend downstream that might be going to refill their water. If you must poop outdoors, here are the things that you should do. Okay, so the first thing you can do is dig a cat hole. This just means a hole in the ground. Think of it as a little grave for your poop. So use a trowel. This is why I always say that you should have a little trowel, which is just a little tiny shovel in your pack. Use a trowel, dig a hole that is like 8 inches deep. A lot of people say 6 inches, just dig it 8. Dig it as deep as you can, but at least 6 to 8 inches deep, and then 4 to 6 inches wide. And make sure this is also 200 feet away from water. This is like so important. But also make sure it's 200 feet away from trails and campsites. You don't want people accidentally walking through your poop. So then do your business in the hole that you just dug. Then once you're done, cover that hole with that original soil and pat it down. Make sure it's fully covered as much as possible with as much natural material as you can. And then try to like camouflage it, you know. If you are using toilet paper, this is for pooping and peeing. If you're using toilet paper, you need to pack that out with you. It is not going to decompose. It takes a really long time. So just bring a Ziploc baggie, put your used toilet paper in there and pack it out with you. It's going to be light. It's not going to smell. Put it in a Ziploc, put it in 2 Ziplocs, whatever you need to do to feel better about it, feel less gross about it. Do it because it's important to pack that out. I have seen so much toilet paper on the trails and it is so annoying and so gross. Don't be that person. One other piece about disposing of waste properly in the outdoors is washing dishes and disposing of gray water or wastewater. So there's a couple of things that you should do when it comes to washing dishes in the outdoors. So one of the things you should do first is to like get rid of all of the food scraps. So any food scraps or food particles, use a strainer to like catch all this food or like wipe it all up with like a handkerchief or something like that and put that in a garbage bag. Because you want to try to minimize the amount of actual food scraps that are getting into the ground, right? The next thing you want to do is there's mixed opinions on this, if you should use any kind of soap or if you just shouldn't use soap at all. Personally, when I have been out, I have used the like tiniest amount of biodegradable soap. And I know there's no such thing as like truly biodegradable soap. But I've done research on like what soaps are recommended for minimizing environmental impacts and purchase those. So I use like a teeny tiny bit of biodegradable soap to usually wash the rest of my dishes and things like that. But then you want to make sure that you are carrying that water at least 200 feet away from rivers, streams, bodies of water, that kind of thing. And you are like scattering it. So, like, throw it out into the forest, into the bushes, make sure that's kind of scattered around. You don't want to just like dump it all in one place. But the biggest thing that I can say is like try to get those food particles out first. And if you can just use water, just use water. But if you must use soap, use a tiny bit of biodegradable soap. The fourth principle of Leave No Trace is to leave what you find. So what this means is leave rocks, leave plants, leave flowers, leave artifacts, leave everything that you might find out there. Unless it is trash or waste, you need to leave it there. I know it is tempting to want to bring home rocks. It's tempting to want to pick wildflowers. They're beautiful. But leave it. If it's part of the ecosystem there, you need to leave it. So there's also a couple of like nuanced things around here. And these were some of the questions that folks in my Discord server were asking about. The first one is rock cairns. So if you don't know what a rock cairn is, that's like you've probably seen pictures of this like at your dentist's office, like that terrible stock photography that they have framed up on the wall is like a stack of rocks on another rock. And it's just like these stacked rocks. It looks kind of cool. Like, it's kind of pretty, whatever. A lot of people like making those because it's fun. It's fun to make a little rock stack. But the problem is that if you are stacking up rocks, it is harmful because it can disrupt the local ecosystems, right? So first of all, by picking up rocks, you are exposing sensitive soil or other things that are underneath those rocks that were previously protected. So you're exposing all of that. And then also, if you have all these rocks stacked up and they fall, then that could cause potential damage as well. And if you're like, Madeline, I don't care about that. I don't really care about the environment, like whatever. The other thing here is that actual people who are navigating the backcountry do use rock cairns for navigation. So like they will use rock cairns to mark certain areas on trails to help with navigation. So if you are setting up a bunch of other rock cairns or you're knocking down rock cairns or whatever, then you could potentially be getting somebody lost, like really severely lost. So just don't stack rocks. Just leave the rocks alone. Leave them be. Ignore them. Just leave them. Okay. The next question I got was about sea glass, and I did a little bit of research and digging into this because sea glass is technically trash, right? It's technically waste. So if you're thinking about Leave No Trace, it's like, well, obviously you can take that and bring it home with you because it's trash. The one caveat I will say here is that I guess there's two caveats. There are some beaches that specifically prohibit taking sea glass from those beaches. So, like, there's one in California that's really famous, and I'm sure there are more, but there are areas that have specific laws and regulations around you are not allowed to take any sea glass from this beach. So, make sure you're reading all the signage in that area. And then the other piece of this is that you're not supposed to just take a ton of sea glass. So, like, if you go somewhere and you see that there's like a ton, that is more of an indicator that's part of that natural ecosystem. And not natural ecosystem, but that existing ecosystem. So if you're like taking a ton of stuff out of that environment, it might be disruptive, if that makes sense. So use your best judgment here. Again, this is why sometimes Leave No Trace is very nuanced. It's just depending on the situation, depending on the location. So do your research before. Like if you're planning on beach combing, look up the beach that you're going to, see if there's any rules or regulations, and then when you get there, look to see if there's any signage. But for the most part, you should be fine to just take a couple of pieces here and there. Principle 5 is minimizing fire impact. So as we all know, fires cause incredible damage. Like I live in Washington State and we feel the impacts of fire season severely. And I know other parts of the country, California, just suffer so severely. And a lot of the time, this is caused from people not putting out campfires properly. So be careful when you are managing your campfire. There's like things you need to make sure that you're doing when you're actually having your fire. Like keep it small, make sure it's relatively contained. You don't want like giant tall flames. You don't want a bunch of stuff flying out into the woods and stuff potentially igniting the underbrush. Keep them small, keep them contained. Use established fire rings or fire pits whenever possible. You really shouldn't be creating brand new fire pits and fire rings, but if you're in the backcountry and you must create a campfire to keep yourself safe, try to make your own fire ring so that it stays contained. Um, with firewood, you're also not supposed to really collect it from the surrounding area. You're supposed to buy firewood from like a camp host or from someone selling firewood nearby. So just kind of pay attention. Usually there's signage that says that. Use a camp stove instead if you can, like if you can. There's like propane campfires too that you can make. But the other really, really, really important part of fire safety and leave no trace is making sure you've extinguished your fire properly. So there's a couple of ways to do this. If you have a fire and it's kind of burned down into embers, pour so much water over it, like all of the water you could possibly have on you, pour it on there because you don't want to hear any sizzling when you pour water on your fire. If you hear no sizzling, then it's probably pretty close to being out. But after you've poured water all over your campfire, what you need to do is like get a stick, get something to poke it, move all the coals around, all the remaining whatever you have left over, move that all around in the pit and make sure that stuff doesn't reignite or make sure stuff isn't still sizzling. You might have to do this a couple of times like you usually do. And then you should also, after you feel like it's in a good place there, you don't hear any sizzling, you don't like see any steam coming up, you should be able to put your hand on that and not feel any heat coming out of it. A lot of places will encourage you to cover or like bury your fire as well. So like after you've fully extinguished it, to cover it in additional rocks or sand. So just do your research in that area of like what's the best choice there. But basically, just make sure it is 150% without a single doubt extinguished before you move on, before you go anywhere. The sixth principle of leave no trace is respecting wildlife. So we've already touched on this a little bit when I was talking about like proper food handling and food safety and stuff like that. But like I was mentioning, human interaction disrupts wildlife. It disrupts their natural behaviors. It can lead to health risks for those animals, but also leads to health risks for humans. Like, like I was saying, it can attract more bears, attract more animals. It encourages them to become dependent on humans to eat. And that's not what we want. We want them to be independent and self-sufficient and be able to forage for their own food. We also don't want them getting too familiar with people and seeing humans as friends. We want them to continue to see humans as predators or at least neutral. We want them to stay away from us, right? The other piece here is like food aside, wildlife can be really dangerous. Like we hear stories every year of people at like Yosemite, people at all these different places getting completely annihilated by wild animals because they are not giving them the respect that they deserve. They're not giving them space. They're trying to get right up in their business to get a good picture or video, whatever it is. No picture is worth your safety. There are so many videos and pictures now of people just getting absolutely gored to death by elk. You might think, oh, it's just elk. They can't possibly be dangerous. They're dangerous as hell. Like, just give wildlife space, respect them, leave them alone. Leave them be. They're dangerous. Number 7, principle number 7 is be considerate of other people. This is one of the golden rules, in my opinion. Like, imagine a friend of yours is hosting you at their house and you're staying there. You're going to be polite as hell. You're going to do everything that they say. You're going to pick up after yourself. You are going to stay clean. You're going to be well behaved. Like that is how you should be behaving on these lands because we are simply visitors on indigenous homeland. Like, let's just be respectful. So these are some things that you should make sure that you're doing. You should keep your like voice and noise levels down, right? So you should be running, screaming, like being super, super loud. Like one of the things that I learned growing up going outdoors and camping with my dad was to have reverence for the outdoors as a kid. Like, sure, you can use your outdoor voice, but you should not be like screaming and running around because the outdoors should be revered and respected. And that's not doing that. So keep your noise levels down. Don't be playing music out loud. For me, I sometimes will be listening to like an audiobook or music really, really quietly at my campsite because I'm usually camping by myself. So if I keep it really low levels, it sounds like someone's actually like talking or hanging out with me at the campsite, which is helpful for me to stay a little bit safer. But I always make sure that it's at levels that like you literally cannot hear it from the other campsite over. Maybe you can hear it by somebody just walking by my campsite. You can hear it a little bit, but no more than the sound of someone's voice talking. You shouldn't be playing music on the trails. That's like everybody's biggest pet peeve. Please don't do that. Nobody wants to hear your music on the trail. If you insist on listening to music on trail, put headphones on. It's really simple. It's just like if you were on an airplane or public transit. Um, again, clean up after yourself, be aware of other people, learn the rules of the trail. Like there's like kind of unspoken, unwritten trail etiquette to follow. Who needs to yield to who, like that could be a whole other video in and of itself. But ultimately, just be respectful of other people because this is a shared space. It just all comes down to respect. So those are the 7 principles of Leave No Trace. Now, I want to make sure that while you all know the Leave No Trace principles, why they exist, how to follow them, please keep in mind that all of these things are nuanced. Like I said, there's always gray area. There's always like places where you need to bend the rules because of safety or because of a really specific situation or whatever it might be. Like these are guidelines to help you protect and respect the land. Are they hard and fast rules that absolutely must black and white be followed at every single second of every single day? No. Use your best judgment. Follow these guidelines where you deem it appropriate. And then beyond Leave No Trace, there's a bunch of other things that we can do to protect and support our public lands, especially as we're thinking about these budget cuts, about resources becoming more limited, and agencies like the Forest Service not being able to do the level of work that they have been able to do in the past. So here are some of the other things outside of Leave No Trace that you can do to have an impact. Read trail signage. Trails, signs, and bulletin boards provide a lot of valuable information about the area that you're recreating in. They'll include information about trail closures, recent wildlife sightings, restrictions, permits, passes that you need, wildlife safety tips, just lots of great information. So it'll have stuff for you. So just make it a habit when you get to a trailhead or you get to a campsite, just like read all the stuff on the bulletin board. It's always pretty interesting, in my opinion, to see like all the different stuff. And in this, make sure that you have the correct permits and passes that you need for that area. It's sometimes it can feel like, oh my gosh, these are public lands. Why must I pay? But this like small investment goes a long way in by way of supporting our public lands by being able to fund them, right? It helps with the maintenance, the staffing, and other conservation efforts. So make sure you have the correct permits and passes. In Washington, it's usually the Discover Pass that you need for state parks and some other recreation areas. The Northwest Forest Pass, that's more for forest services. And then there's also stuff like the America the Beautiful Pass, which also counts as a Northwest Forest Pass and provides access to our national parks. So do your research on the area that you're going to beforehand and just make sure you have paid the right amount for the right permit and the right pass. The other thing you can do is when you get to a trail, fill out the trail registers or trail logs. So sometimes at the start of trailheads or certain recreation areas, there will be like a little register that you can fill out with your name. This helps for a couple of different reasons. It helps with emergency search efforts. So like if something happens to you, search and rescue can see that you've registered on the trail register and know that you're on the trail, or at least you checked in at some point. But it also helps with the Forest Service teams and whoever's managing that land to better understand the volume of people coming through and using that trail. So it helps them understand kind of from like a traffic standpoint, how many people are going here, and then they can be able to staff and allocate resources appropriately. Another thing you can do, and I know this is like a frustrating one to have to put on this list, but it's just the way it is to pick up after others, because there are inevitably going to be people that you encounter on the trail that are not following Leave No Trace, that are not picking up after themselves. Every single trail I have been on in the past 5 years, I've seen at least one piece of trash and picked it up. So what you can do is just in your backpack that you're bringing with you, you've got the 10 essentials in there, just throw a garbage bag in there and maybe like a pair of disposable gloves or a handkerchief or something like that. And then when you do see litter on the ground, you can just quickly pick it up. Like, even if it's just a tiny small corner of a wrapper, those things add up a lot. So just pick up trash. This helps ease the burden on the Forest Service staff, especially as these resources become more stretched. It's a really easy thing to do. But in this, I also want everybody to try to assume the best in people. So this is just another thing that we could all do together, is assuming the best in people and like educate each other with kindness. So if you see someone throw their banana peel on the ground and walk away, instead of just being annoyed, picking that up and staying silent, what I would do, just because I feel comfortable doing this and I have the knowledge in the background, is I'd probably walk up to that person and be like, hey, like, no worries, I just picked this up for you, but like, just want to let you know that like banana peels can't go on the ground because they don't decompose very quickly and they can attract wildlife. And we don't want wildlife obviously like coming to the trail and threatening people and stuff. So I picked it up for you, no worries, but like, just so you know, for future reference. If you approach it with like kindness like that, instead of like walking up to somebody and be like, pick up your trash, if you approach them with kindness and explain the why behind the thing, people will actually be pretty receptive. I think a lot of people just like don't know, which sucks. I wish everybody knew everything, but sometimes they just don't. And sometimes you just need some extra help there and we'll do better in the future. If there are situations where you should not say anything, there's definitely situations where it's better to just remain silent. Like if you are a solo female hiker and there's a group of 5 men who have left a campfire burning and left it alone, you probably should not go up to those 5 men and be like, hey, just so you know, you didn't, put your fire out all the way. This is important because of X, Y, and Z. They're not, don't do that. Like, use your common sense as to like when you should try to educate people and when to just kind of mind your own business and take care of it on your own. If you do see something and you are not able to help, like if you see someone having an illegal fire, for example, in the backcountry and they are far away from you or you don't feel like you can talk to them, like there's a fire ban happening and you're like, oh my God, they should not be having a fire. Instead of risking yourself and your own safety and going up to them and telling them to put it out, what you should do instead is submit a report to the Forest Service when you get down from your trail. So it sucks to not be able to say something in the moment. And like, obviously, there's a certain level of risk that you then introduce because they could start a fire by the time that you're able to submit this report. But like, you see larger issues like illegal campfires, downed trees, overflowing pit toilets, things like this, you can report them directly to the Forest Service or whatever local park agency is in charge of the land that you're on. It's really important for them to be able to go out and mitigate those issues because obviously they can't be everywhere all at once. So if there is a safety issue, like definitely go and report it. And then on the topic of just reporting stuff, write trail reports. This is really helpful. So there's like in Washington, we have the Washington Trails Association that is more localized version of all trails basically. So you can go on and leave trail reports there. That's helpful for just other people to know what the trail conditions are like. You can tell other people, other hikers, but also land managers about any issues or things you observed on the trail. So yeah, see what local agencies have trail reports that you can submit. But also there's just like, there's all trails that you can do as well. Yeah, it's always really useful. And the more people that can get in the habit of submitting trail reports, the better. And then finally, one of the like biggest things that you can do to make an impact is to vote. We obviously just had the general election and, TBD, some of the impacts that will come from some of the people that have been elected in that recent round of voting. I'm deeply concerned about the potential privatization of our public lands, but that's a different topic for a different day. But we do like Congress controls our budget for public land agencies, including the Forest Service. So every 2 years we get to vote on Congress. Voting for candidates who value and fund conservation work is a very powerful way you can ensure long-term health of our natural spaces and the preservation of them for the future. So go out and vote. Make sure that you are able to do that. Vote again in 2 years. Vote on local initiatives that impact conservation and environmental impacts of your land. And make sure you're placing your vote in people that are going to continue to um, fight for us. So before we wrap things up here, I just want to really quickly touch on like this concept of performative leave no trace, specifically as it relates to like influencers, content creators, and people on social media. So I just talked to you all about like the importance of assuming good intent and educating people kindly and making sure you understand the why behind all of these different principles. And that's why like I get very frustrated and annoyed by influencers, outdoor photographers, brands that market outdoor content and then kind of do like performative leave no trace. And what I mean by that is like, I think I'm going to poke a wasp's nest here, but there is a coalition of mostly white elopement photographers in the United States that will oftentimes post about leave no trace. Like they'll be like sharing a beautiful picture of an elopement at Mount Rainier National Park, and then in their caption they'll just say like, be sure to follow leave no trace. And maybe they've posted like one infographic about leave no trace, but they're part of this coalition that's like lobbying against commercial permitting for photography. And that is performative, in my opinion. So, permits and fees are designed to offset the impact of commercial activity. So, if you are somebody who is profiting off of public lands, profiting off of the land, and then you're not paying any additional fees on that, like I don't think that supports long-term sustainability and conservation efforts. I think that that is exploitative and shitty. So, like, there's that. That really bothers me. And then there's also this whole other subset of influencers and people on social media who will just like post pictures of people violating leave no trace, but then like not do any education about it. So, like, someone can post a video of like, oh my God, I saw this fire that somebody didn't put out, this campfire, and I put it out, and basically wanting everybody in their comments to like congratulate them on being a good person, but then they don't share how to properly put out a campfire in that same video. And it's like you should be doing both. Like if you want to like get the congratulations of being a good person and like doing that, fine, but like then also provide the educational resources and like help people understand why it's bad to leave a campfire out. Like I post pretty often about like picking up trash on the trail and how it's frustrating to see human waste on the trail and things like that. But then I always back it up by like, here's what this means and how you can make an impact and why this is bad. So like, don't just don't just be a little police officer, like a little narc online, like also do the work and share the education and share the why. So at the end of the day, it is really important that what you're doing goes beyond just like performative leave no trace, if that makes sense. So let's wrap things up, okay? Leave no trace is a commitment to preserving nature so that future generations can enjoy it just as we do. It's not just about strictly following these arbitrary rules, it's about respecting the environment, right? I want to address one particular piece of pushback that I get in my comment section all the time. There are always people, usually white men, in my comments that are saying, there are no rules for enjoying nature, or don't tell me what to do in nature, don't tell me what to do outdoors. And I'm laughing and I don't want you to see it as condescending because I do think it is like natural for some people to feel like if I'm entering the wilderness, I should feel free to do whatever I want. And it definitely varies depending on what part of the world you're in. But I want people to view Leave No Trace not as like a restrictive thing, but something that's supposed to like help. Like it's supposed to help encourage you to have a framework and a mindset of being respectful and mindful of your impact and protecting nature. So it's not just like me telling you what to do and you must follow these arbitrary rules because I said so. It's like, if you want to continue enjoying the outdoors and enjoying these spaces together, like we all have a responsibility to take care of it. So here are some guidelines and some general resources for you to do that better. Like just I don't know why it's such a contentious point with people where they're like, don't tell me what to do. It's like, look, it's kind of like if you think about merging traffic, like etiquette, like best etiquette, in order for like traffic to keep flowing at a good pace and to avoid accidents and stuff like that. When you're merging onto a freeway, you're supposed to do the zipper method, right? Like one car goes, then another car goes, and that kind of thing. It's a very similar to thinking about like leave no trace, right? Like you don't have to do the zipper merge. You can be that asshole that cuts people off or refuses to let people in. You can do that. There's no law that says you must zipper merge, but is it the right thing to do? Is it going to be kind and respectful to that person that's trying to merge? No. Is it going to help traffic flow in a way that just keeps going? No. Is it going to make more of a backup in terms of traffic? Yeah. It's going to make traffic worse. But is it illegal? No. So it's like one of those things of like, no one is going to like come after you and jump out of the forest and say, you're arrested because you didn't poop 200 feet away from a trail. But if you step in human shit on your next hike, that's not going to be so pleasant. Let's just all try to be better people, try to take care of each other, try to take care of the land, and try to work on preservation because, like, I want to keep loving and recreating on these trails in the future. I think you do too. We have the same goal. Let's just work together on it. So, all in all, leave no trace is more of a mindset than less of a list of rules, right? It helps us create a more inclusive, more accessible, more sustainable outdoor space where everybody feels welcome, everybody feels some level of responsibility. And I hope that this episode was interesting and useful and didn't feel like preachy. Because I know sometimes this stuff can feel like you're just being preached at, especially when it's a list of like rules. But I hope this was useful. I've learned a lot just from learning more about like the nuances of different leave no trace policies and stuff. Thank you for tuning in to this episode of Outdoorsy. I appreciate you all so much. I know we have not had a quote unquote normal episode in a little while here. But I promise next week we will be back with a regular scheduled interview episode. I'm very excited about that. And back to publishing more regular bonus episodes. So if you are interested in supporting the podcast, because I make $0 from this podcast, you can go to patreon.com/outdoorsy and become a Patreon subscriber. For $4 a month, you can just say like, thank you. If I get enough people doing that tier of the Patreon, I'm going to start doing personalized shout outs to everybody every episode. So I'll say thank you, Joe Doyle, for subscribing. That's my husband's name. It's the first name I could think of. But you know what I'm saying? I'll do a little personalized shout out. So there's that. And then the next tier up gives you access to bonus episodes and exclusive voting power. And then also, I just wanted to let you all know the other benefit of that tier was the Discord server, but I actually have opened up the Discord server for everybody right now because I think that community is more important than ever right now. So it's just free and open. If you want to join the Discord server, you totally can. Please don't make me regret opening it up to everybody. The reason why it was initially behind a paywall was because I wanted it to be super safe and I wanted to make sure that there was some sort of little bit of a barrier to make sure that everybody in there was serious about creating a safe and inclusive environment. But right now, I just want to have no barriers to community. Like, just come on in, join us, chit chat, be in community online there, because I think it's really important right now. So I will probably eventually paywall that again in the future, but for right now, it's just open for everybody. So come on in. That's patreon.com/outdoorsy. And then the Discord link and everything is going to be in the show notes. I just want to say one more time how much I love you all, how much I appreciate the support. Um, I really hope that I can continue to be a bright spot for you on your feeds during this extremely dark time. And I hope that you all continue to feel encouraged to show up with joy, and feel happiness and find comfort and peace in the outdoors because you deserve it. But until next time, I hope you get out there, whatever way makes sense to you, feels good to you, and just remember that you belong out there.